Welcome to Goodwin College Master of Science Organizational Leadership Graduate Program Leaders Lounge. The Leadership Lounge invites community leaders to share their story. We have with us today a very special person. If you had to use the cliche, if life gives you lemon, turn them into lemonade, it would not apply to this guest. Unlike the cliche, he turns lemon, his life challenge, not into lemonade, but something much more refined and complex, limoncello. If you're not familiar with it, it's a fine Italian liqueur. A lot better than lemonade by a long shot. He even sings about his trial and life challenges. I'm a follower of this man. Someone might say I'm a stalker, but in a very nice way. But don't get me wrong, I'm not the only one. Plenty of folks over the U.S., even in Japan, admire this man. Who is this leader? He is an educator. He loves sharing his talent with upcoming artists, young and old, or established, if you prefer. A role model. He engages middle school students into his performance, and I attest to it. He does really a great job. A very creative songwriter. When you have the opportunity, be sure to ask about his old furniture on Greg's list. You have to see it. I mean, you have to hear it. It's really entertaining. A Grammy Award nominee, winner of multiple Independent Music Award. Not an easy feat for anyone. A well-traveled USO entertainer, a brother that everyone would wish to have in their life. A native of Western Massachusetts, a leader with amazing skills. We are very lucky to have this leader with us today. He is an inspiration to all who are lucky to know him. It is a pleasure and honor to present to you Seth Glier.
Thanks, man. I'll give you a hug. Thanks, dude. Awesome. Oh, let me do that. Yeah, you're good.
Nope, it's yours.
You're good. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for showing up. I'm gonna start off with a song, because it's one of the things that I get to do. I'm gonna start off with a song and then tell you a little bit about sort of how I make my life work and what has influenced my life, and end with a song. And I really, one of the greatest things about these things for me is being able to really hear what you guys are interested in, hear your questions and all that stuff. So first of all, can you all hear me in the back? Great, awesome. How many of you guys are familiar with the woman Malala? Okay, great. So Malala was this woman who a few years ago she accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, and shortly after, this song was inspired by an answer that she had given to a question. Shortly after accepting her Nobel Peace Prize, she was asked, "What would your response be if you had re-encountered the two members of the Taliban who had tried to kill you in your village?" And her response was, "I would thank them, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have the platform that I have now to talk about women's education and female empowerment and youth empowerment." And I thought it was just such an exquisite example of blaming responsibly. You know what I mean? If you're going to blame someone for all the shit that's in your life, you also have to blame them for all the positive stuff that is in your life. So I wanted to write a song that was essentially a letter that you would write to your perpetrator, but also it could be scanned down from top to bottom as a love song. So this is called "If It Wasn't For You." If it wasn't for you, I'd be someone else, different version of myself, before I even knew. The door that you blew open changed forever in a moment. If it wasn't for you, I can't imagine who I'd be. You're such a part of me, a part of me. You're the proof, the truth I needed to believe. I don't know what I'd do if it wasn't for you. You gave me a gift. You taught me to be stronger when you punctured through the armor. Water under the bridge. Well, the things that I got over standing on your shoulder. If it wasn't for you, I can't imagine who I'd be. You're such a part of me, a part of me. You're the proof, the truth I needed to believe. I don't know what I'd do if it wasn't for you. How can I be for you? Everything you are for me. Everything you are for me. If it wasn't for you, I can't imagine who I'd be. You're such a part of me. You're the proof, the truth I needed to believe. I don't know what I'd do if it wasn't for you. Thanks. Thanks. So I wanted to start with that song because oftentimes I find that it's the times in our lives that cause us the most sort of tension, the most anger, frustration, or pain, that ultimately is the same thing that transforms us and allows us to be more transparent, open human beings, and thus more collaborative leaders. So organizational leadership is an interesting topic for a songwriter to take on. Much of my time is spent with pretty solitary work. I spend most of my days alone with a guitar or with a piano and sort of chasing an idea around the room, painting myself into corners, and hopefully at the end of the day trying to say something new, something that hasn't been said before. So I look at the songwriting process much like sculpture. Much like you have a block of clay or a brick of stone. For me, I start with this blank piece of paper, and it really kind of feels like the words are like these jagged edges of stone that are violently falling through down onto the floor. And it's really the removal of the unnecessary that allows a shape and form to reveal itself. And this form was in the marble all along. Now, I am someone where music and lyrics tend to happen all at once. Sometimes it's a line that I've heard someone say, or I wrote down, I've been chewing on for a little while, and that might inspire some chord changes. Other times, it's a tone or a chord change itself that might inspire some words. But when I'm adding words to music, I am deeply aware that I'm doing two things at once. It's far from multitasking, but it is this quiet and heightened sense that the most subtle change of one thing is going to affect another in the most dramatic of ways. Now, for as long as I can remember, I have always wanted to be a performer. I grew up in Shelburne Falls, the small town of Shelburne Falls. Are you guys from Massachusetts? You were nodding. Okay, cool. The Bridge of Flowers, and great. It's too cute. It's too cute. Yeah. Um, Now, I was a fiercely independent, self-driven middle child, and I honestly didn't really understand this idea of working with other people until much later in life. I was talented, I was tenacious, and pretty insubordinate, and for those reasons, I didn't really know what to do with school, and school definitely did not know what to do with me. In 10th grade, I went to Mohawk Trail Regional High School, and in 10th grade, I got suspended for playing the guitar during study hall, and I decided to write a protest song to the principal about suppressing my freedom of expression. Uh, I then took it upon myself to play that song outside the principal's office over and over and over again until I was expelled by the end of the week. But there was something in that moment. I was grateful for that moment of creative confidence because it stuck with me in a large way. You guys have gone a lot further along in college than I have. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and while I was there, I kept saying to myself that I wanted to be playing songs for people instead of grades. So I dropped out after my first year there. I moved back home with my parents, and I bought a Toyota Camry, 1989 Toyota Camry with 250,000 miles on it. And I started driving it around the country with my best friend Ryan, playing every open mic and smoky dive bar and bar mitzvah. We played a bar mitzvah. Just about any place that would have us. I was terrified of what might happen if I inherited the same zip code as my parents and friends. And Ryan typically drove. I would sit in the passenger seat with a laptop on one knee and iPad on the other knee and a phone in my ear, and I would just call around to different promoters and different venues and different artists, and I would see if I could open for them. I was just trying to find a way of tying these weekends together without killing us driving. And for 3 years straight, I booked about 300 shows a year, developed a deep, everlasting love of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I was also sort of aware that my education had just begun. I was a college dropout, sort of taking courses from my car stereo, and I was working on my degree in Springsteen and Joni Mitchell and Jackson Browne. And now, calling these promoters, asking artists to open, ultimately led me to developing really long-lasting relationships with these promoters. Every once in a while, I'd come across with really generous performers. Like, I think I first met Sandy and Gaston through, was it Livingston Taylor? Was I first opening for Livingston? Is that where I met you guys?
CD release.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I benefited from other performers putting me in front of their audience, and over a period of time, I started developing my own fan base. About 3 cars and 1 million miles later, I was very lucky to get a record contract, and eventually a booking agent that started turning all of my endless driving into markets that I could play. Now, currently, I have a team of about 11 people, and I'm still with the same record label that I signed with 10 years ago, which in this business is fairly unheard of. Now, the team sort of consists of a manager and a few staff that works for him that sort of handles my day-to-day. A couple booking agents that are handling my scheduling and all of the contracts that go with that. I have a wonderful woman who runs my social media accounts and newsletter, and a handful of people that are working on just getting my songs into film and TV placements, and also pitching these songs to other artists who are looking for songs and they might not write their own. In addition to that, there are two musicians that I work very intimately with who travel with me on the road full time. And there's a lot of imagination and creation and ideation in that pairing. So there's this photo of me that my parents love to pass around at reunions. And it is a photo of what I believe is one of my earlier or maybe first performances. I'm 6 years old. I am dressed in a leopard print onesie, which is unbuttoned to my navel. And I have a fur mink slung over my neck, blue and pink curlers in my hair. And I'm playing this palm tree painted ukulele with one string on it for whatever collection of relatives I could gather around at that time. Now, when I look at this picture, beyond the costume, I see a suit of armor. I see a kid that was so starved for attention that he was going to go look for it almost anywhere. But I also see a kid that sort of had something all worked out. He knew how to create a new reality for himself and anyone willing to watch his performances. Somehow that kid knew that if you kind of keep kicking the darkness, eventually that darkness will bleed into daylight. Now, anyone who knows me well, Sandy and Gaston and I, we've all talked about my relationship with my brother at length. And my brother's name was Jamie, and he was born with a pretty severe seizure disorder called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and he was also on the autism spectrum. Now, my parents' focus towards me was oftentimes distracted by the very immediate needs of my older brother. My home was sort of a revolving door of nurses and physical therapists and social workers, and my world was sort of chaos followed by acceptance. That was the structure that I made make sense. But I understood early on that these strangers who were coming in to help Jamie, they were strangers that I learned to trust very quickly, because by helping Jamie, they were also helping my family. They allowed time for my mom to make dinner. They allowed time for my dad to do the dishes. And as a child, my parents encouraged me to sit in on ISP meetings, and I listened to my parents articulate goals that they had for my brother. I listened to them redefine goals that they had for my brother. I have an early memory of my mother taking me out of school in 4th grade and taking me to the State House to lobby for some bill that was going to help with my brother's disability services. So in a very quiet way, my parents really instilled this value of advocacy. Now, when I turned 14, my parents had this grand idea that it would become, my duty around the house would be to wake up an hour early before catching the bus, and I'd get my brother showered and dressed and give him breakfast each morning. I assure you that idea as a 14-year-old did not go over very well for me. But every morning I watched a world change, and I was a part of that world changing. Urine-soaked bed sheets, the smell of feces, and a twitchy older brother would turn to a load of laundry, cheesy scrambled eggs for breakfast, and a smiling Jamie as he took his anticonvulsive medication. So in this house, there was this daily transformation in just about 50 minutes. And in that 50 minutes, not only was his environment transformed, but also our relationship would transform. We would go from care provider and care receiver to essentially two brothers listening to music and hanging out as normal as could be. Also in this transformation, my anger and jealousy over all of this attention that he seemed to get was slowly being replaced by a new sense of service towards him. So I often refer to my brother as my greatest non-musical influence, because I think in his own way he taught me a whole new way of how to listen. He taught me how to hear what not saying says. He taught me communicating with him required reading into body language and gestures, a posturing of a shoulder, a darting of an eye. What I learned from him is that there's language in everything, and there's many different kinds of ways to listen to another person. Now, how this is sort of translated in my own team is, I'll give you this example. I have a manager on my team who drives me fucking crazy from time to time. And I asked him if I could share this story beforehand. So I affectionately refer to him as someone who he thinks with his mouth, if you know what I mean. We all know someone like this. We've all had fathers. So the biggest point of contention typically with us is when I suddenly need to schedule a meeting to handle something that's time sensitive, whether it's a pitch for a tour or a festival. Sometimes there's a contractual error, so anything like that. Sometimes it's a creative error that we just need to kind of strike while the iron's hot. Now, I'll say something like, let's hop on the phone at 1. And his response sometimes is he doesn't respond at all. And other times his response can be defensive and a little dismissive. Sort of like, why am I being bothered by this? Now, as a peacemaker, there are few things that get under my skin as quickly as anything that smells like selfishness. It goes right to the core of me. So what happens is, intellectually, I know that he is stressed, but emotionally, I'm the one all of a sudden being defensive and dismissive. And about a year ago, I went down to New York City to spend a week with my team. We did these the personality tests workshop, similar to, are you guys familiar with like Enneagrams or the Myers-Briggs test or anything like? So we did an intensive week-long workshop like that. It was exhausting. But as we started discussing our archetypes around the table, I gained a further insight in how my requests are frequently triggering this individual's fear. He is someone who gets completely absorbed by the work. He is consumed by whatever project that he's working on. So when I'm expressing my need to have a discussion about it, he is afraid that either he's going to lose his train of thought, or that it's going to be an interruption and he won't be able to get back to the flow that he was in. Now, as a creative, I totally understand that fear. That's a fear that I'm harboring all the time. So our collective solution was fairly simple. I now give him options. We give each other options. If we have to talk on the phone in short notice, I will say, look, we can chat at 1 or we can chat at 4, and I let him pick what time works best for him. It's a really simple change, but inside this change, there's a change of listening, and there's also a change of language that's taking place. And this simple thing has totally transformed our productivity and our camaraderie on a daily basis as a group. So I want to sort of step back to my family. One of the things that I didn't know at 14 that is very, very clear to me now is that people can only take on so much. There's only so much you can shoulder. My parents were amazing advocates, and but 30 years of care providing for my brother ripped their marriage apart, and it forced me to take on some responsibilities that most 20-somethings don't take on. At 22, I became my brother's legal guardian, and during their divorce, my role as Jamie's guardian changed pretty much overnight to one where I was constantly being sort of propelled to the front lines to protect, defend, and advocate for my brother, while my parents navigated their separation with resentment and lawyers. My daily task was to sort of shield my brother from the shrapnel of my parents' covert war. Now, divorce rarely has a positive effect on kids, but I watched it sort of be unbearably cruel to those that couldn't advocate for themselves. In its own way, though, this was probably one of my greatest lessons in leadership. And it's a strange thing to talk about, but their divorce, I learned how to withstand the unbearable loneliness and isolation that comes with having the power to make decisions. Now, many people, my wife works at a nonprofit, and so we talk about power a lot. She also has a peace and conflict study, so we talk about power a lot. We're also married, so we talk about power a lot. Now, most people are fighting for this power. They're fighting for more responsibility. We're fighting for more autonomy in our relationships, in our work. We're fighting for more authority, oftentimes. In my case, all of this power was given to me, and it was holding it that changed me in a way. It taught me how to trust myself, and more importantly, it taught me how to trust myself while continuing to hold respect and love for those I disagreed with. In this case, this was my mother and my father. At the time of my parents' divorce, it was chaos, and I certainly was not sitting back going like, yeah, what a great lesson I'm learning. But if the equation for comedy is tragedy plus time, then perhaps adversity and self-reflection are the makings of good leaders. During this time, I became fluent in the teachings of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. I also began the practice of transcendental meditation twice a day. And with the help of these practices, I learned about my parents as human beings. I learned about their fears. I learned about their vulnerabilities. We all learned about each other's failures. And throughout the process, I also educated myself. I learned a lot about disability law, more than I would ever need to know in another circumstance. I learned how to separate emotion when making these difficult decisions, but I also learned that emotion is valuable in making decisions. I learned how to be wrong, and I think the formative thing as both a human and as someone working with my team was this sort of cardinal rule of leadership. I learned that compassion is always stronger than force. Now, about 4 Septembers ago, I was in New York City, and I was writing songs for a company. And I stepped out to check my cell phone, and I got a voicemail from my dad that said Jamie was in the hospital, and he was having 200 seizures an hour that they couldn't stop. Now, what doctors like to do when someone is having status seizures is they induce a coma for 48 hours. It's kind of the equivalent, they're trying to reboot the brain. It's the equivalent of trying to shut a door in the middle of a hurricane. You've got all this information flying through it. And over the course of 6 weeks, they did this drug-induced coma 5 times with no change. And as I sat beside Jamie's bedside at Boston General Hospital, I thought a lot about the difference between the witness and the sickness. I'm sitting there, and the brother that I learned from while giving him breakfast, the brother that I loved and shielded, I didn't see him there anymore. All I saw were the seizures. The sickness was all that I saw. So the next day, my family and we decided to make the switch to comfort care. And in the conference room with the palliative care team, there was a considerable disagreement between my parents on how to proceed. My mother wanted organ donation, and my father wanted to spend as much time with Jamie as he could. He didn't want him to be rushed off to an operating room. So tempers began to boil. The meeting ended abruptly without a plan. And legally, the hospital did not need this to be a family discussion. So they brought me aside, and with emotions escalating quickly, began to walk me through the comfort care procedure. And step by step, I asked them questions. I asked them to try to minimize muscle contractions so that any movement wouldn't translate to my parents as Jamie being in pain. I decided to donate Jamie's veins, his eyes, and his skin to the New England Organ Bank. And this didn't require having to move Jamie near an operating room, and I could go back and I could tell my dad that we'd be with Jamie as long as we want, for as long as it takes. There's no rush. This is sort of what I learned in their divorce. Their divorce taught me all of this, how to mediate between their needs and my own perception of what Jamie wanted. And at this point, I was so good at it by now that for a few seconds I could even forget that my brother was dying. I was sort of just riding the leadership. So with his family around him, the nurses took out his breathing tube, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I was surprised that it didn't happen right away, and I was grateful that it didn't happen right away. It took about 50 minutes for him to take his final breath, and in that 50 minutes, there was complete transformation. That is sort of what Jamie does. It gave me time to stop counting the seconds between each breath. It gave time for my sister to smile. My mother stopped crying. My dad climbed into bed with him. This was sort of Jamie's act of leadership. I look at sort of that last 50 minutes, and he reorganized us as a family in those 50 minutes. I've spent half of my life so far as Jamie's care provider, and a good portion of that as his guardian. But his death has kind of given me the simplicity and the honor of being his brother again, which is something that I am so grateful for on a daily basis. Now, that photo I mentioned with the leopard print onesie, which I swear is coming back. I went to Urban Outfitters yesterday, and we're like one spring away. Since that photo was taken, I have given just about 2,000 performances. And the biggest thing I have learned in the performing arts is that quite often things don't go as you planned. Things fall apart. A performer takes a mistake and innovates, and in doing so, they inspire everyone else to do the same. Sometimes we push through only to find that the most memorable moments were not the times that we got things right, but they were the times that we were the most vulnerable. So whether it's an ISP meeting or an IHOP with my team after the Grammys, I am reminded that to be transformed by another person is the greatest gift we have to accept. Jamie taught me something about this, but he also taught me something about myself. I've learned that people are not something that I give up on. And whether it's organizing a group or in songwriting in a more intimate way, organizing the interior of my own heart, I can only move as fast as I trust other people. I'm going to leave you guys with this song that was inspired by growing up with my brother, and then I'll really turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Flesh and bone in a world his own, he's different from the rest. Born the first of three, never took the lead. Parents did their best. Told fairy tales in bed. His own story never said. He used to ride the short bus to school each day. With the brother's eye, I watched every bruise break his way. Said it's just like everyone. But he's not like anyone. Waiting on a sign, praying to break through when nothing else can speak for you. Love is a language we hang on to. Love is a language we hang on to. Keeps the trouble in her chest, every breath is saying things will be alright. Two strangers in a house, he's a sleeper on the couch every night. Dad traded booze for caffeine. Mom keeps his collars clean. Waiting on a sign, praying to break through when nothing else can speak for you. Love is a language we hang on to. Love is a language we hang on to. Everyone wants proof. No one wants the truth. I'm just like everyone. I'm not like anyone. Waiting on a sign, praying to break through when nothing else can speak for you. Love is a language we hang on to. Love is a language we hang on to. Love is a language we Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Thank you, Seth. Does anybody have any questions for Seth? Anyone?
Sure. Two phrases that you said. First, you talked about this experience of riding the leadership because you become so good at it.
Yeah.
Almost like a Zen trance, right?
I was hoping no one would pick up on that.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
But then also the experience in performing when things don't go right. But those are sort of the hairy edge of disaster moments that actually make it, you said, memorable, maybe even fun.
Sure.
Right?
Sure, like when the strap fell off. All of a sudden I was exactly where I was supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah.
It strikes me that it shows how I think sometimes performance is a great training ground for leading. Because it's the moments that test you are really those ragged edges where you have to sort of get into the moment and put everything else aside and just make what has to happen. I think some people, and I'll count myself among those people, that actually seek those moments out, kind of like an adrenaline junkie. And I wonder if you have that experience or how you view that.
You know, it's a great question and a great observation. So this is something that I am working on in all different facets of my life. I have made my life work by going and processing trauma in an isolated place, and then I come back and I can present it to people as a product, you know. Now I do photo shoots for them. Like, so the sense of being able to put together something and then present it was that was a muscle that I've been developing for a long time. What I'm currently working on in both my relationships with my wife, with my team, is being able to share the untidy, the things that have not been processed yet, and to just say, I don't need you to fix this. I don't want to fix this quite yet, but here's what's going on. That's excruciatingly difficult, and some of my favorite leaders are people that do that. So that's something that I'm working towards. And when I say riding the leadership, is I'm able to function in a pretty high level, but there is this delayed reaction to the pain of that. So yes, great question.
Vulnerability. You sung about the love language with your brother. Did you ever get to sing to him?
Yeah. I mean, music was sort of our first shared language. It was the way, probably around 7 or 8. I mean, prior to really working on a one-to-one PCA relationship with my brother, I had no idea how to have a relationship with my brother because there was this great communication barrier, what I perceived as a communication barrier. Now I perceive language as a communication barrier. But in some of those early years, music was a way of kind of normalizing the relationship. I would put on music and listen to it with him, and he loved Sarah McLachlan and James Brown, and he had a pretty eclectic style that he liked. So that was probably one of the first connections, first tethers that we had.
Cool.
Yeah.
As I'm going through the program here at Goodwin, I'm trying to not make assumptions, but I'm going to make one here.
Fantastic.
I would assume that most people would assume that you were right brain.
That I'm a what?
That you're right, left brain, right brain, as
Mm-hmm.
far as the creative aspect
Mm-hmm.
of what you do in your music. Do you feel that? Do you feel like you're more creative versus analytical? And is there a bridge between the two as you go through your leadership styles?
Good question. And pardon my ignorance, but right brain being like is that typically the creative, and the left brain is like analytical,
Yeah, most
right?
people, like the people that are very rigid and type A and have to have things done a certain way are more like left brain, whereas the right brain, correct me if I'm wrong, are mostly the people that are they're creative. They do music and they do acting and they express themselves in different ways. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you feel like there is an aspect of you that swings one way or the other.
I don't. I personally don't. I don't look at it in as black and white as that. I do look at it in a similar way of, so much of my work is about memory, right? And whether I'm writing a song or coming up with a story, I definitely experience it as you've got your head and you have your body. I feel those different poles, and I'm always trying to stay in my body. Yeah.
So you talked about the story, and that your music is a story, and it's about something that you're working through or on. Is there something you're currently working through or on? Can you share it with us?
Yeah. I'm working on a book, which is excruciatingly difficult, and yeah, man. I realize the more I do this, how much this thing is a shield. It's a wonderful weapon to sort of throw energy out into a room and get people's attention. But once you have it, it's also it really can deflect some truth. So it's a totally change of form for me to just try to tell a story without that, and it feels really naked and really hard. Other things that I'm currently working on is I have been working as a consultant for the U.S. State Department for the last couple years, and they have a program that was started with Louis Armstrong in the early 50s, essentially taking musicians over to what was the Soviet advancement, and it's a cultural exchange program. So I had done a program with them in Mongolia, China, and Ukraine, and yesterday we just confirmed that we're going to be, I'm taking a team of about 7 people to Mexico and Honduras for the month of March. So that is, trying to learn Spanish, and that's my big task in front of me right now.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Here,
Fabi? Go ahead.
yeah, I'll come right back. Did you have a question?
I'm interested in what you were saying. You kind of solved or resolved some conflicts with your team by personality tests.
Mm-hmm.
Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
I was wondering, if you could talk about, like, did those personality tests sort of like bring into your awareness certain aspects of your team that you might not have known otherwise, or like how they were sort of helped you to
Yeah.
communicate better?
Well, this actually might be, it's, as you're saying this is reminding me of your question. So a lot of our time is spent, like I had a call with my manager yesterday, which is, all right, I'm gonna be releasing new music in January. There's a whole plan of scheduling involved in that, where I've made some music. I need to continue making music every 3 months and basically finishing a product. And as we're putting out music in January, we're also planning the touring schedule of all of that. And so there's a lot of processing that's done in front of a spreadsheet. There's a lot of processing that's done collectively and collaboratively with our relationships. And frequently we can forget the why. The why are we doing this? Even I forget on the road that I get the best part of this job, and frequently no one calls my team unless there's a problem. So so it served as a couple purposes. One, we put work away, and it was just about let's go play pinball, and I feel like adults do not know how to play together. And it's been a kind of continuing theme. So it was an opportunity to really play and have all of those experiences when you're just trying to share joy with another person. But then there were also some really specific techniques around communication, such as I kind of knew, because I'm a pretty self-aware person, I kind of knew that I'm a water sign, all that kind of stuff. And I honestly, I had overlooked the complexity of textures in these people. One of the things that we did after this week was we took cell phones off of a conference table. And then all of a sudden, it's, my manager talking to an intern saying like, his mom's having a tough time with her partner of 30 years. And, they never split up, but there was a period that was hard. And it's in those sharing that's where trust gets built. And I think that was the biggest lesson, is that every year we have to be intentional around creating time to just build trust. And that's such a enigma, right? But if we're not making time for it, it's not going to happen.
It was just the talks, when you started doing the talks, after your brother passed away.
Yeah.
Is that for you like a form of you like remembering him all the time? Like it helps you to kind of heal the pain of sharing, of his passing, sharing his story and your story? Or just you see the story as a way of like connecting with people, or is a way of healing yourself and what you guys went through together?
I think probably the greatest thing I've learned from a life writing songs that I think is applicable to organizational leadership, it's applicable to politics, it's applicable to all things, is that how we tell a story has the power to change a story. And so when I was given this opportunity to do a TED Talk, it was like a couple months after my brother passed away. I think it was way too early, personally, but it did open up a whole new lane for me to grieve. And it opened up a whole new way for me to understand that I'm not alone in that. I like that people open up when and sometimes it's hard, but I think the hard things are what makes it real, and honest. Yeah.
I guess that's going in. If it doesn't kill you, it makes you a better person.
Yeah, I mean, but I will say, so the double-edged sword of it, and what is it? The New Zealand comedian did this in her latest comedy special, Hannah Gatsby? Hannah Gatsby, are you familiar with? The point is that the thing about sharing the story is sometimes when you bring a story from here to out here, it can seal off the story. It can freeze it. And for instance, there is the illusion of a beginning and a middle and an end. But that's just not, like, the real sticky stuff is like I'm still working through forgiveness with my dad. I'm still my family is still healing. We're still figuring out ways of creating some ritual around this and some closure around this, and that's not tidy yet. That's not folded into the story, but it's also real. Yeah.
I want to know about your old furniture and Craigslist.
God.
I
Wow.
don't forget things.
Wow. I had an ex-girlfriend who when we decided to split up, I went to stay with my parents for a couple weeks while she would just kind of figure her stuff out. And this was also kind of like right in the middle of my parents' divorce, so it was an awkward time in my house. I was 24, and so I'm sitting on the couch with my mom, and my mother had just gotten an apartment, but she hadn't moved into it yet. And so she was looking for furniture to furnish her apartment with. And so she's on Craigslist, and she shows me a couch with these orange, embroidered pillows. And I looked at it, and I said to myself, I used to have a couch that looked just like that. And we found out that, anger leads you down a whole bunch of rabbit holes.
Many other things too.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Of all the guests that we have, we always ask them 3 questions. The first one is, what's your best leadership lesson you ever heard?
Ever heard? Well, I don't know if I heard
Or
it.
learn.
But so I got the privilege of touring with Anita Franco when I was 21 to 23. And watching this woman, it was beyond, she didn't look at her task of just like hiring the best people, but she looked at her whole role of creating a environment where people, there's this notion that you're supposed to bring your best self, and she didn't really subscribe to that. She wanted people to bring their whole self. And that meant that if someone just had a fight with their significant other, or they lost a parent, bring it on stage. Bring it with you, because it will transform there. And this is to your point, there is a practice in performance that comes with it. But I just love that sense of creating an environment for people to be their whole selves as opposed to just their best selves.
Thank you. And the second one, 3 words that describe your leadership today.
My leadership?
Yeah.
Or
leadership as you understand it.
Empathy is a big one. Neurodiversity, not just diversity, but the fact that it takes many different kinds of minds and different ways of looking at a problem to solve a problem. And I would say there's a lot of talk around like innovation, but for me it's imagination. That it's essentially whatever group you're tasked with leading, we have to go towards some place that doesn't exist yet, because all these places all of these institutions that we have created are crumbling and don't work. So I think imagination is a large component of it.
Being creative.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on this. What's your next act?
Yeah.
You mentioned the book.
Yeah. And going to Mexico, and they're just when I had done the I hope for all of you, my wish is that you can find. I had a lot of reservations around the State Department thing for reasons around imperialism and a lot of things. But when I jumped into the program, it was one of the. This is my wish for anyone. I found something where all of my cylinders were firing at maximum capacity, where I'd show up in a place and there would be no common language whatsoever, and then there would be something that would break the silence, and all of a sudden their eyes would light up, and they know a little bit of that language and they know a little bit of this language, but then like they got a whole other language to it, and that, so that there was this nonverbal communication that was alive there. There was a sense of diplomacy, and then there was also a sense of providing a service that was nourishing and soulful. It was breakfast, So I'm looking forward to that again.
Anyone else? Thank you, Seth.
Thank you,
It was
guys.
great.
Yeah, cheers.
That was great.
Right on. Oh, thanks, man. It was fun.
That's great.